Greetings, students, and welcome to this episode of The Professor Travel. I am your host, The Professor Travel, coming to you from Orange County, California. This is the website, the vlog, and the podcast that you come to in order to learn more about different travel destinations. This is where you come to in order to discuss them as a community. Hopefully, this will inspire you to travel more and ultimately enjoy life more. Now, I'm available through a variety of different social media. You can find me certainly at my website, which is theprofessortravel.com. You can also find me both on YouTube and Facebook at The Professor Travel. I'm now available on TikTok, so you can find me at The Professor Travel. If you want to find me on Instagram, you can find me there at the_professor_travel. If you are on Twitter, you can find me there at theprofessortr1. And then finally, if you're a blogger, you can find me on Blogspot at theprofessortravel.blogspot.com. Today, I am so incredibly privileged to interview one of the amazing visiting professors, a monster in, in cruise influencers and in travel, Mr. Gary Bembridge. Hello, Gary. How are you doing today?
Hi. Very good. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you very much for doing this. You are with us today all the way from Europe. What time is it there right now?
So it's now 4:20 in the afternoon.
Oh my goodness. And so it's almost
nice sunny summer's day as well, which
yeah.
is good.
Well, it's fantastic. Well, before we get started, I just wanted to share a little bit about your background with my students. So can you tell us a little bit about your educational background and maybe a couple of favorite places that you've traveled in the past?
Sure. Well, so as you mentioned, I'm in London. I've been living in London for 30-something years. I actually grew up in Zimbabwe. So my dad originally went there to join the police force in what was in those days Southern Rhodesia, so before it was Zimbabwe. And so I went to junior school, high school there. Actually went to university in South Africa and then moved to London. And I've been in London. So I've lived in London all that time, although I had a job which was with Johnson & Johnson, which I guess many people have heard of, looking after, I had like a global marketing job. So that's also where I started traveling a lot. So although I was based in London, I was living part of the time in New York sometimes, parts of Asia. So sort of lots and lots of travel kind of around that. So that's my sort of background, but London is sort of where I count as home, really.
Wonderful. And maybe a couple of special spots that you like. What are those travel destinations that you typically go back to on a regular basis that you really, really love?
Yeah, that's a good question, because people always ask me that, what are my favorite places in the world? I'll tell you what my favorite places in the world are. And then one of the things I would say is I'm always wanted to go somewhere new. That's the big thing. So I constantly, I guess we'll talk about it through the course of this, is I have this real desire to see things I haven't seen before. So I often don't go back to places, but where I do like to go to, that my favorite place in the world is Victoria Falls, which is on the border of Zambia and Zimbabwe. It is the most spectacular this place in the world. It is very underdeveloped. So if you go to somewhere like Niagara Falls or something, it's all quite commercial around it. I mean, it's still a spectacular sight. Victoria Falls is, it doesn't have there's these huge big cliffs and there's no fences there, and it's very raw and it's just magnificent. I love going to the beach. So if I was going, so I love the Caribbean. I love places like Mauritius, places like that. And then, although my new sort of favorite places is the Arctic or Antarctica. So it's sort of the extreme. So, if I can't go to the beach, I want to go somewhere cold. I go to like the two extremes, if you like. I like it if it's like 40 degrees or minus something degrees. I also, as you can see, I have lots of places. The other place that I also really, really like is Palm Springs.
Oh yeah, that's right here in California.
Yeah, exactly. So my partner and I go to Palm Springs. Well, he probably goes there more often than I do, but like it's sort of a place that it's just very comfortable. It's a kind of a strange place in many ways, but it's a great place, and it's it's hot, and it's just a very welcoming place. So that's sort of a place I'd go to kind of just relax and chill out. So those are sort of the spectrum of places. But to summarize it, very, very hot or very, very cold.
Very nice. Do you tend to also gravitate more towards rural than, say, more urban, or does it really matter to you?
No, it's interesting. No. I mean, the sort of joke with my friends is like my idea of hell is going to the countryside. So, so, so I like cities. I like where there's stuff happening. But saying that, as I said, two of my favorite places is mentioned Victoria Falls and Antarctica, which is not busy. But generally speaking, I love cities because I like going to see things, and I like to do things. I like to go and visit museums or visit things, famous things or buildings or whatever. So that, I'm much more of a city kind of person.
That makes sense. Okay, so during this interview, I want to talk to you about your channel, which is Cruise Tips for Travelers, but I also want to talk about, what it is, maybe how many countries you've been to, because you've been to a lot of places, which
Yeah.
I'm just floored by, what types of content you have on your site, and of course, some of your favorite travel tips. Now, before we get started on that, let's dig a little bit deeper into who you are. So, I want to know a little bit more about you and why travel is such a passion for you.
I mean, it's interesting because ever since I was very small, I was obsessed with like getting out of where I was. So what I mean by that is, my parents were English. Well, my dad was English, my mother's Scottish, and so all our family, most of our family is still back in Scotland or in England when I was growing up, and I always felt I was missing out. Of course, now when I look back, I realized how amazing it was growing up in Africa at the time because it was such, it's changing. It was a very beautiful place to grow up. But I always was intrigued with, my roots, I guess, if you like. But also as a little boy, I loved history, and so I would read about Egypt or English history or American history or whatever. I was obsessed with history, so I wanted to go and see all these places where things had happened. So I always that ever since I was small was always kind of something I was obsessed with. Also, so there's that side. Seeing those historical things was probably driving a lot, partly the roots. But also, as a little boy, I was quite geeky about things like trains and planes. So I always wanted to go and try these trains I was reading about, or these amazing, ships I was reading about, or whatever it was. So there was always this I wanted to go and do this. And when you're in Africa, you don't have that. Although, of course, now you do, because like in South Africa, you have things like Roberts Rail, which are all these old trains reconstructed. But so I always just wanted to get out and see things. And also because growing up in Africa, there's not a lot. I mean, in relative terms, there's not a lot of people, and everything's very far away. And I would look at all these things like in England where everything was so close, and you could go and see stuff. So I think it was those things that kind of drove me. I always was worried that I was missing out, I guess.
Well,
I needed to see things.
That's curious for me. I mean, you mentioned earlier that you had a career actually with Johnson and Johnson, but I was kind of worried. Not worried. I'm kind of wondering why you didn't maybe start in the travel industry, or was that more of a hobby for you, or like a reward almost for doing?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question because I never ever considered travel as a career ever. It was really interesting. When I was looking at a career, I liked, originally I was very into advertising. I didn't realize this thing marketing existed. And so when I went to university, I discovered actually this marketing is, it's more than just advertising. And that's what I really, really liked. And so I'd always decided I wanted to be in marketing. Then I'd always decided actually, but if I joined like a multinational corporation, by nature it would have a global aspect to it, and it would possibly have a chance of moving around. Now, originally I was thinking, well, if you look for a global company, you can maybe move between different countries or whatever. So it was my love of marketing and then looking for a big multinational. So originally when I started working was with Unilever, and then I started at Johnson & Johnson. And I stayed at Johnson & Johnson for 25 years or something like that. So
that's a pretty long stint.
yeah, no, absolutely. And that also helped feed my passion for travel, because I was originally a UK company. Then I had a European job looking after Johnson's Baby around Europe. So I was traveling around Europe. It was very exciting at that time because things like Russia were just opening. So we were very early in developing the Russian business. So going to Russia before Russia was really developed, Eastern Europe was developing. And then I took on a global role from that, and opening up China and stuff like that. So that was kind of fed my travel stuff, because on the plus side, because it was business travel, you traveled business class and stayed in really nice hotels.
Oh yes, very
and
nice.
and even better, you earned air miles, which you were allowed
true.
to keep. So that then fueled all my kind of social travel, if you like. So
very nice.
Yeah,
Very nice indeed. In fact, I got to think that had to be very, very exciting to get in emerging markets
very.
from a purely marketing standpoint, let alone other business aspects. What a great opportunity. So all of a
Well,
sudden,
we can also, I didn't also, sorry to interrupt
oh,
you. You
sure,
asked me how many countries I've been to. I mean, I actually did the exercise. I've never done the exercise before when you originally, and you were asking a question. And I worked out I've been to 80 countries,
80?
80, yeah.
Wow.
And, and then, and then I started looking at all the countries I haven't been to, which was really bad because it made me really frustrated.
Be frustrated. This
Yeah,
is
you know,
it's kind of like these are your goals now at this point to be able to
exactly, yeah.
consider. I mean, I myself have been to 23 countries. I originally had, I think, 4 other ones to kind of visit in March of this year. Unfortunately, the cruise I was going on was canceled, as we obviously know, unfortunately.
Yeah,
But there's still those opportunities, and I always look at it as, next year's another opportunity for us.
exactly.
And I want to talk to you about some of the continents that you've been to in just a couple of minutes. But with respect to your channel, okay, so
Mhm.
you've had this career. Now, all of a sudden, a couple of years ago, you developed this channel called Tips for Travelers, or Cruise Tips for Travelers. And to me, I got involved in this. I started watching this, I'd probably say a few years ago, probably about 3 or 4 years ago, I'd say. And it's been really beneficial to me as I've done my travels. You have a lot of different things and content on there, but what prompted you to start doing a YouTube channel?
Well, I started, I started originally back in 2005. And what happened was, as I mentioned, I was doing this kind of business travel,
Hmm.
and because I was obsessed with seeing things, if I would always try and plan my travel, so I would have a day before or a day after, maybe a weekend. So I might be in one week, say, having a meeting in Singapore, Hong Kong, then maybe going to Sydney or something. So what I do is try and plan it. So I thought, okay, I've got a day in Singapore. What can I do? And before I'd go, I researched like crazy to say, okay, I've got 8 hours, 9, whatever it is, and I want to see these are all the things I must see. This is the order I must see them in. This is what I'm going to do. This is how I'm going to get around, so that I could use those 8 hours really well. And then I thought, well, I've got this kind of. Then of course I worked out what worked. But then I thought, well, I've actually got this really good content. And then Apple launched iTunes and
Mm.
podcasting. And I would always, again, the geek in me was like, I'd love this idea. In fact, when I was at university, I'd done like campus radio. We set up a radio station.
Oh.
So I was a bit of a kind of a closet like presenter and kind of thing. I thought, this is brilliant. So I have this content. After you're staying in hotels, a lot. So you've got the evening to do it rather than just work. You have distraction. So I thought, I'm going to start a podcast. So I started a podcast, which I'd originally called My Travel Reviews, I think was the first couple of episodes. And I thought, well, that's kind of a dumb name. So then I just sat down one evening and I started Googling, not Googling, looking at domain names.
Mhm.
And I put in tips for travelers because to see ideas. And I suddenly realized that domain name was available. So I took on the tips for travelers. And so I started the podcast, and it was very destination focused because that's what I was
Mm.
doing, and it was all around things you can do in Sydney in a day, things you can do in Singapore in a day, things you can do in, Seoul for a day or Paris for a day or whatever. And then I think it was in 2006, about a year later, YouTube launched. And so what I started doing was videoing my hotel rooms that I was staying in, partly to show people and remind myself where I was staying. And
Mm.
I put those on YouTube. And then I started videoing, I'd go to a museum or I'd go on an attraction. I just started videoing that and I started putting that on YouTube. And then both the podcast really took off, partly because there wasn't many travel podcasts at the time. And the YouTube channel started taking off. And so I thought, there's something. So I just kept going with it, posting it. Pretty much focused podcast on destinations, YouTube very erratic. Then I started cruising, and then I started posting more cruising content.
Mm.
That started taking off, and that really started taking off. And then I'd always, sorry, it's a long-winded story.
No, that's okay.
But
Please.
so my plan had always been from very young that I was going to retire when I was 55. That had always been my plan, and so I'd always been working to the idea of retiring when I was 55. So, so financially and everything, I could do it. And then my idea when I retired when I was 55 was that I was going to do some marketing consulting, and I'd spend more time traveling, doing my podcast and everything. So you're right. A couple of years ago, when I retired, I started focusing much more on the channels and stuff. But what I realized is two things. I realized is one, when I'd come back from a trip, I would always do the video first because I like doing the video. I enjoyed that the most, and I do the podcast second, and then I'd write a blog post third, begrudgingly. Then I also, because I'm not a writer, I can write a business proposal, but I'm not a writer, so people are much better at writing. But I thought
I feel your pain. I'm kind of the same way too.
and then I sort of thought about it. I thought, well, if you really want to, I may as well earn some money from this, being kind of quite blunt about it. So, and I looked at it, I thought, well, you can't really make money a lot of money in podcasting. I mean, some people can, but I thought it's probably much easier to make money on YouTube. And what I liked about YouTube is you get enormous amounts of data, and I love data, my marketing background.
Yeah.
So I started focusing on combination, and I love the fact that it could tell me, I got a much better read on who my audience was, what they liked, what they were watching. So I started focusing on YouTube much more, and then it really took off as I focused and fine-tuned what I should do and stuff.
Are you still doing the podcasting as well, or is it
I do.
tandem?
Well, no, I have. So I have two. I have two podcasts. The Tips for Travelers podcast, which is actually this. I think this is the artwork from, and I do that much less frequently. I have another podcast which is called Essential Tips, Cruise Tips, which I strip out actually the audio from the videos.
Yeah.
Edit them a bit and I use those as a podcast. My main Tips for Travelers podcast is much bigger. So I tend to only post more destination stuff more on that. But it's much lower priority than it was, but it's still much bigger than the other one. It still does pretty well, but because because it's quite evergreen content, old episodes from 2-3 years ago still do really, really well because people are looking for tips on Paris. Most of them are still largely valid. So yeah.
Absolutely. And one other quick question: is it Tips for Travelers with 2 L's or with 1 L? I know the spelling is different.
Good question. It's Tips for Travelers. The domain name is Tips for Travelers with 2 L's.
Okay.
Tips for Travelers with 1L.com is a dormant URL, domain name, which I've been trying to get them to sell me, but they seem to think it's worth like $50,000, and I'm saying it's not worth $50,000. So at the moment it's a 2 L's.
They need to do a market analysis to better determine it's not worth 50,000.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the places that you've been to. Okay, now, so how many continents have you actually been to at this point?
I think I've been to all of them now. So yeah, I've been to all of them, I think.
Okay, perfect.
So I've been to North America, South America, Asia, Europe, Antarctica. That's all of them, isn't it? I left one out. And that's all
Asia, Europe, obviously.
Yeah.
So okay, and Australia.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And you said you've been to 80 countries, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. I so envy you. I can't even begin to start. Now you do a variety of different content, but one of the things I really was fascinated by when I started listening to you a couple of years ago is you were one of the only content creators that talked about traveling solo, specifically traveling, by yourself on cruises and things like that. I would like to take a moment to talk about that because I know some people are very hesitant to want to travel solo, primarily because of risk, but also because of comfort level in some cases. What has been your experience or understanding of that process?
I mean, I do like traveling solo, and I do, as you say, I travel solo quite a lot. I mean, I travel with my partner quite a lot as well, but obviously because I am now retired from full-time work, I can travel as much as I want. So I take advantage of traveling as much as I want. So, but I guess I got used to traveling sort of solo by myself from work originally. So So I kind of got much more comfortable with the whole process of solo traveling. And what I have realized is, right, I do more and more content around solo traveling, probably because I travel by myself, but also I've seen a definite growing interest in solo travel. I guess because more and more people are maybe getting married later, or getting divorced, or just have the comfort zone, whatever. So I have done a lot of around that, and I think you're right. One of the key things is having the confidence to do it. And I found, I certainly, I found women are much more nervous about traveling solo, and I can probably understand why. Because also, even when I was working, a lot of a lot of my peers were women, and they would be much more reticent about traveling solo. They'd be much more restricted around what they felt they could do when they were traveling solo. But to me, it's just about it's always been about being cautious. Like, I'm not a particularly big risk kind of taker, and it's about really understanding what you can and can't do in a place. So I would always spend a lot of time, like, uh, is this a city or a place that I can move around by myself, or is it a place that I should pretty much stick with the hotel in terms of eating or not eating, and that sort of stuff. So I almost don't think about it. That's the thing. So that's what I've realized is I get a lot of questions about solo traveling. How do you do it? And probably, though, the biggest question I'm seeing much more is people are more worried about the cost of solo travel than whether they should do solo travel. I think more and more people become comfortable because, and particularly with cruising, it's a massive issue, because very few cruise lines will give you a solo rate. In most cases, you're paying up to 100%. On some of the cruises I do, if my partner Mark came with me,
Mm-hmm.
we would basically be paying the same for the cruise
Okay.
as me going by myself. Or, I'm not saving very much by going solo. So that's a massive, massive challenge. So a lot of the stuff I get asked is, how can I cruise solo in a more affordable way? It's become much more of the bigger issue, actually.
Let me chime in really quick, because I know
Mm.
Norwegian specifically has solo cabins.
Yes, yeah.
And
They
are
have
they the only ones that
studios.
you're aware of that does that?
So it's a good question. I mean, what's happening in cruising is the people there's two cruise lines that really look after solo travelers from that perspective best. Norwegian Cruise Line, because they have the studios, which are a great concept. The downside with those is they're not on all their ships, but they're on all their new ships, and they're all inside cabins and very small. So if you're a sort of traveler that doesn't mind traveling in an inside cabin, doesn't mind having a small cabin, it's great. Now, obviously, Norwegian ships are big and there's lots of things to do. They have a lounge. Coming back to your question about making people feel comfortable, they have a lounge in that area. So it's a key card controlled. They have a lounge where you can mix and meet other solo. So from that perspective, it's good. And it's quite affordable. The other cruise line that does it well, but it's very limited, it's very specialist, is Saga Cruises, which is in the UK. They target the 50 plus traveler. They have two new ships, one which has come out, one which has actually just sailed out of the shipyard this week. And 20% of their cabins are solo cabins, but they're all balcony cabins, but they have solo suites, solo balcony cabins, like premium, mid-priced, lower priced. So 20% of their cabins are solo cabins.
Mm.
The downside with Saga, it's very UK. They only sell to the UK. It's only for 50 plus. They tend to have a slightly older audience, and they are sort of a premium line. But those are the two cruise lines. So I'm answering some again a long way, but many of the cruise lines are starting to introduce solo cabins, but the problem is not many. So, Cunard put it, I think it's about 20 on their ships. Holland America, a couple of their ships has a solo cabins. So some of them are starting to. Royal Caribbean, some of their newer ships do, but no one does it like those two cruise lines. They don't.
The other thing I would want to ask about, if you're aware, are there like group cruises specifically that cater to like singles and things like that? I'm not sure if like
Yeah,
there's a market for that.
there are. I mean, one of the things there are, and there's things like, I'm trying to remember the name of the site, but it's something like solotraveler.com or something like that. But if people literally Googled solo travel cruise groups or something, and I think it's called solotraveler.com, but there are groups that organize solo travelers. And one of the great things, what I always recommend with people solo traveling, which is what I do, is I many cruise lines, and even including river cruise lines, will offer solo deals at different parts of the year. They tend to be off season, not surprisingly,
Yeah.
but you can do everything from Silver Sea, for example. On Silver Sea site, they have a little tab in their special offers, which is called Solo Travelers. That's how when I did my Antarctica trip, I went through there because they were doing it 10% on only. Ponant, for
Mm.
example, they have them. So the other thing that I always recommend solo travelers do is two things. One of which, sign up if there's cruise lines you like, sign up, because at some point there'll be a solo traveler. But an easier thing to do is if you go to those aggregator sites like Vacations to Go is one. They're global, even though they're US based, or you can book anywhere, wherever you are in the world. In the UK, there's one called rolcruise.co.uk. But those two, they both have a section for solo travel.
Mm.
So what I often do if I'm looking like planning ahead is I'll go to those two sites and look at the solo tab and see what all the promotions for solo travel is at that point in time, because that's where you'll find in an easier way where you can travel, where you can travel solo for 10% to 25% premium.
That's fantastic.
Premium supplement, yeah.
The other thing I'd like to touch base with you on really quick, because I know that you're one of the when I look at the travel influencers that are out there, they're always talking about the big three. And for my students that don't know what that is, that's usually Carnival Corporation, Royal Caribbean, and of course Norwegian. MSC is coming up a little bit, so you may hear a few things on that. But you also focus on other cruise lines that are more premium, and in some cases, or maybe even smaller in some cases, that people aren't necessarily focused on, or river cruises. I mean, I hear you talk about Cunard from time to time, and Oceana, Paul Gauguin, Azamara. How did you get into that space? Was it something that you were just interested in, or was it one of those things that you noticed there was a gap in the market that people weren't talking about that?
It's a combination of all those things in reality. I look at cruises that I would like to go on. Also, my audience is mostly 45 plus, and something like 35% are 65 plus.
Mm.
So I also look at the cruises that I think that audience would like. I mean, I'm 61, so I sort of go on cruises that I kind of want to go on. So it's looking at what I think my audience would like, what I would like, and it's also partly around, when you look out there, finding a point of difference is you can find shed loads of stuff about Royal Caribbean, shed loads of stuff about Carnival, shed loads of stuff about MSC. It's also trying to find something that's not out there, because also what I'm trying to do is find what I think is right for the audience, but also become someone comes to say, I want something different, or I'm tired of going Royal Caribbean. What should I do about whatever? Or I'm thinking of going to Oceania. Is it the right one for me? And so that's sort of why I do it. So it's a mashup of all those things. And also it's looking for stories that I can tell that haven't been told. If I was to do something about Royal Caribbean, there's not a lot new that I can do. I can do things around, which I have done, for example, on some of those cruise lines. I'll do things around multi-generational travel, for example. That most of my audience are probably going to be, they might have kids and grandkids. So they might be looking at cruises which work for all their families. So I'll do a thing around why I think, say, Princess is better for a multi-generational travel cruise than Holland America is. Mm. It's that sort of angle.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Something else I want to touch base on is, because you've done so much travel, your view on risk management. Talk to me about places that you look into traveling that might have political or civil unrest, and how that affects your travel plans.
I tend to be relatively cautious when it comes to that. I think the advantage of going cruising, because I think there's two things. One, if you're doing it yourself, and secondly, cruising. The advantage of when you are cruising is they will tend to manage all of that risk in most cases successfully. I know there's been some examples where they haven't, those tragic things that happen with two cruise lines in Tunisia and stuff where some of the excursions were attacked and people were killed and stuff like that. But generally speaking, they tend to be quite cautious. So they will often have done a lot of pre-screening on those before. I also, however, I have gone to places where there has been risk. So like I've been to Egypt a couple of times where they have their big flare-ups and issues. And so I sort of take a slightly fatalistic. I sort of balance the fatalistic side, which is,
it's a realistic view.
No, it's realistic. It's sort of like, what do I think the risk of me falling into trouble in these places are, and what is the, and what is the benefit? To be honest with you, I often would be more keen to go just after something has happened.
Yeah.
So actually, for example, I went to Egypt just after there had been some attacks. I think it was this was quite a few years ago now, but there was they attacked tourists outside the Cairo Museum and outside the Queen Hatshepsut Temple.
Mm-hmm.
And we went like a month or two after, because my point of view is actually, there's a lot of unrest. They have really locked it down. The same as you've seen when there's been incidents in London, or I guess Berlin, or in Boston, or all that, those sort of things. It's just straight afterwards is when there's the country and everybody is kind of really locked down and strict. So it's a bit like that's sort of how I manage it, I guess. I don't know if that sort of answers your question, but
yeah,
it's and also I don't have kids and I don't have that's so I probably have a slightly more relaxed view. I think if I had kids and sort of families and stuff, I would be much
aware.
More cautious.
Yeah,
and aware. Yeah.
No, that makes perfect sense. On a lighter side, what countries would you like to travel to that perhaps you have not yet? Like, what's on your schedule for like, this is something I really need to do?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a great question, because what I do every year is I sort of sit down, I draw a list of where I really want to go to, and the ones that are currently on that list is Galapagos, which I really want to go to. I planned to go in 2021, but now of course 2020 is now moved into 2021. So it's a whole. It's like taking 2020 and now.
It's like everybody moved their entire plans over 1 year. So
that Galapagos is very high on the list, and I know two people who went last year, which made me even more so. I really want to go to the Kimberley part of Australia. I've seen a lot of stuff. So I've been to that sort of part of Australia, the obvious, the Melbournes, Sydney's, Perth, but I really want to go to that more sort of wild side. And I want to go to much more of South America. So I've been to the obvious places. I've been to Mexico City, Buenos Aires, but I really want to go to explore much more like Chile, Paraguay, those sort of places. I mean, what I would love to do is I'd love to do an entire South South America trip, so you get a flavor and then figure out where I want to go back to.
We have definitely been looking at that, and funny that you mentioned about the flavor of a trip, because when my perspective on cruising is, it's almost like one of those boxes of candies where it's a sampler of all these different things, and it's like, oh, you can find the things that you like, you can find the things that maybe I'm not as hot on. So I mean, of those places that I've gone on cruising, I've definitely seen some places I would absolutely go back in a heartbeat, and have in a couple of places, especially with Venice. Love it. I absolutely would go back in a second, and I've been to Italy 3 times now within the last couple of years. So for me, I have those places that I tend to gravitate towards that I really enjoy and that I really am wanting to go about. Let's talk really quick. I know I'm going long, and I apologize. I want to be respectful of your time, but you are just so wonderful.
I feel like I'm talking too much. So.
No, you have amazing information. That's fantastic. So let's talk a little bit about some of your favorite cultural spots. In terms of religious iconography or places of worship that you've had an opportunity to go to and explore for historical purposes or for just touring, what have been some interesting places that you've seen over your travels?
I think probably one of the most interesting of all was going to Jerusalem. I went, I'd always sort of wanted to go, and I went, it was 2 years or 3 years ago. There was actually a conference, a blogging conference, which was held in Jerusalem. And I found that absolutely fascinating. That sort of the combination where you've got, Christianity, the whole Jewish and the Muslim, and that whole mishmash, and the conflict and the coexistence and and all that. But just sort of understanding that this place was the center for so many religious, so much religious significance for such a diverse range of religions. And you've got the place where Jesus was, depending on your beliefs, also wasn't, and the temple, and then the wall, and just that I found absolutely fascinating. And that was probably the most interesting, because there's that whole like mash and the significance, because I sort of the importance of Jerusalem, but until you go there, I don't think you really understand. I hadn't really understood just how important it was, and how and there's a feeling about the place which I hadn't really appreciated before. You feel like you're in somewhere really important and significant. That was the one for me. That stands out way. The second one, if I could have a second one, is when I went to Japan, which is another place that I want to do that thing you talk about, a taste. I did a cruise around Japan, and I want to go back and spend more time there. But was also, the whole Japanese approach to religion I found fascinating, because we're so used to, even if you're not religious, but you're used to growing up, in a Christian world or a Jewish world or whatever world, country. But the whole Japanese approach to religion I found fascinating, with the Shinto temples, and just they're like, I found that fascinating, because they're very spiritual people, but without the constructs of religion like we used it in the West, I guess, or even in the East. And I found that fascinating, their whole approach to religion, and the temples just fascinating.
I'm always No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. I apologize.
No. I was saying I couldn't quite work out. But you go to these temples, and even I'm not a particularly religious person, but I found them very spiritual, and that was amazing.
I'm always curious what people say to this question, because when I travel around, and like yourself, I'm more of a spiritual person, not as religious, and I've been to the Vatican, and I thought it was okay.
Cold, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, well, especially if you're doing the touring, you're shoulder to shoulder, walking through the place. You don't really get an opportunity to see all the really great works of art as you would, or some of the really impressive history that's there, because you're shuttled through it so quickly. One of the places I found I was just enamored by was on a recent cruise that I went, and had an opportunity to tour St. Petersburg. I got a chance to see the Church of the Spilled Blood, or the Resurrection. Was spectacular in my view. It's a smaller place, but it's one of those places that from a historical vantage point, and from the construct of the artwork there, because it's all tile work as opposed to tapestries and paintings and things like that, just hands down one of my favorite places in the world. So in terms of art though, where would you say is probably one of the favorite places that you've gone that you really enjoy the art the most?
It's interesting, because it's funny. Like I'm not massively into art, but one of the places that I found the most impressive was going to Bilbao, where they have a Guggenheim museum. They have some amazing, really bizarre but amazing, big, massive, big sculptures. So they've got a big Salvador Dali there. They've got some Jeff Koons stuff there. And that I found the most fascinating, because it was so unexpected. I mean, Bilbao built the Guggenheim to try and get people to go to Bilbao, but and it worked, I guess. But I found the art there just so interesting, because it's completely what you would, it's completely unexpected. And I found that the most fascinating. And also, to your point, is problems if you go to Florence, or you go to any of the big museums in New York or whatever, you're shuffling around going, oh God, there's the Mona Lisa, or there's something, or there's a David, but you're kind of ticking it off a list. So that was the best experience for me. Was I hadn't really known what to expect, and it was just stuff I hadn't seen before. And you could walk up to it, and you could walk under it and around it and stuff. That was the best experience, I would say.
Now let's talk about language really quick, because you do so much traveling. Do you experience a challenge with language, or I don't even know, do you speak multiple languages?
No,
Okay,
I don't.
good.
I mean, I found it was interesting when I was traveling a lot for work. I found I would pick up I would pick up language, not because I'm not very good at picking up language, but I pick up enough language to get people comfortable. You know, the hello, the thank you, can you help me? Those kinds of things. So I've always used language as a way of some really basic stuff. So to just break the ice and let people know you're trying. But no, I don't. I'm a very classic kind of. One of the things I always regret is at school, language wasn't a massive part of what we do, and I think certainly, I think it's a disadvantage certainly for the UK, and I'm probably the same in the US,
Yeah.
where when I was working, my European job and in my global job, is all the people that were in my team from Europe, if they spoke 4 languages, that was quite poor. Everyone from the UK spoke one and maybe a spattering of French or a spattering of Spanish, and that is all the issue. So I've had to cope with not knowing language. But what I found is because of the type of traveling I do, I'm normally going to places where like it's sort of on the tourists are known, if you like. So even in Japan, which I thought was going to be a real challenge, you found there was enough people, you could figure out enough to get by. So I've never found that as a massive issue. The only time it's been a real issue is I went in January this year on a Mekong River cruise, but I went with across Europe where 99% of the passengers were French. And that was the only time I found out. So for 10 days, like I didn't really understand what people were talking about. Obviously they would do stuff in English for me and people would talk to me in English, but I felt I was missing out because I was in this environment where I was in this little kind of a bubble. That was any time I felt uncomfortable actually with language on a cruise.
The reason I bring this one up is because I am curious. When I was looking into certain cruises, I think it was Palmateur was coming up, and Palmateur I think is a Spanish-based cruise.
Spanish, yeah.
But they were going to somewhere that I wanted to go on a cruise, which was Morocco, and so that was part of their original destinations. Not so much right now, but or maybe even ever again, unfortunately, with Palmateur. But I mean that to me is a little bit of a challenge because I want to be able to go to some of these destinations, and I feel that I might be restricted if I'm trying to do something like that, unfortunately, if you understand what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the advantages, though, of cruising, because when I've been on other cruises, I have been on other, for example, Cross the Europe, which again is a French company, most of the passengers are French. When I've been on river cruises with them, even though, say, 80% of the passengers have been French, the cruise line itself is very good at making sure everything you get is in English, but they then group you with English speakers. So I've never found that an issue. I know on Pullman Tour, although I haven't been on Pullman Tour, and I guess we never know who will be
at this point.
But I know a lot of English speakers who've been on Pullman Tour, and they've never once raised the issue of language because English is sort of a default thing. There's normally been a big grouping of English people on. So I've generally found on cruises, they're normally pretty good at dealing with multiple languages. But the other thing I've seen, though, which is the complete flip side, is I'm trying to think which cruise I was on recently. I think it was on Oceania cruise around the Caribbean in November. There was a Japanese, maybe 10 Japanese people on the cruise, and 2 of them clearly spoke no English whatsoever. But he would have these long conversations. There was some app, I never found out what the app was, where it was on his phone, and he would talk in Japanese. The app would convert it into English. The person would speak back to them, like he was booking cruises. Actually, he was doing it with the future cruise person. She would speak back into the app. It would translate back into Japanese, and they did a whole transaction with it. So I guess technology increasingly is going to help us.
Yeah, I've seen Google Translate do that, and so I think it's a little bit of a delay in the process, but I've been impressed with what I've seen. There's actually a couple of different apps I think that are doing that. So so students that are out there, pay close attention to these things as far as moving forward. Really quickly.
But can I just say one thing on the language?
Of
one
course.
of the things I think, because I know a lot of people are nervous about language, and I was nervous, but it's actually one of the things I say to people, like if you're doing a river cruise in Europe, you can go on a river cruise like Avalon, Uniworld, Emerald, which are mostly going to have 99% of people going to be English speaking. They might be from the US, whatever. But if you actually go on, like Nico or Across Europe or one of those cruise lines, you're actually going to have a much more European experience than because your passengers are going to be from Spain, from France, from Italy. So it's also that mixture. It's where you go, I think, as well. Is you could actually enhance the experience by going with non-English speakers first language, because most Europeans, certainly in Europe, most Europeans will speak English.
Okay, perfect.
So,
Let's
yeah.
also talk about some diet and food as you've gone through your travels really quick. I know that when I go to certain places, I have a kind of sensitive tummy. And so, going to a place like, for example, at the end of this year, I was supposed to go to India. And so it was one of these things where I was planning ahead of time to, embrace, soup for about a week and then make that transition to eating, more delicate foods in preparation for this. Have you ever had to do like preparation for different types of eating, or whether it's richer foods or street food or anything like that at all on your travels?
Not so much. I always avoid street food.
Okay.
Anything that I'm obsessed with things being cooked in a clean way.
Okay, good.
So I never. And I know lots of people, they'll street food and they'll go to the markets. I never eat food from markets. I never eat kind of street food. I kind of eat in restaurants and yeah. So I kind of, the way I deal with it is kind of avoid that. I'm not adventurous. I have been on lots of trips with people where they'll want to go to the food market, in wherever, somewhere
But
in Asia. It's like, I'll come with you, but I ain't gonna eat there.
but I will say this: you're adventurous in other ways. For example, I've seen videos of you. You're 61 years old. I've seen videos of you biking in other places or doing recreation like that. I'm 47, and I don't think I could keep up with you very well. What are some of your favorite recreational activities to do when you are traveling abroad?
Yeah, so I mean, you're right. I'm very into like being active stuff. So I love doing cycling tours. So if there's a cycling tour, I'll always do it. I mean, the good news is now, of course, with e-bikes, they're incredibly they're much easier now. But so even if people are worried about not being active, if there's a bike ride with an e-bike, don't let it put you off. Cycling is a great way of seeing places. I like hiking, like climbing up mountains, and well, not mountain climbing, but if there's a big hike up a hill, I will do it. So I will always tend to go for the active excursion, often because they are the more scenic stuff, and also I use that as a good argument for why I'm eating so much on the ship.
No, but you actually have a point there, because I know when I've traveled to Europe, whether it was on a cruise or whether it wasn't on a cruise, I found that the US here, we're very sedentary. And then when we go over to a place like Europe, we're seeing a lot of people very, very skinny. And we're wondering, how is that possible? How do they keep up like that? And part of it, I think, is because there are some obviously changes in the diet, but not too much. It seems that a lot of places, especially if you're traveling on a more urban setting, you tend to walk a lot, like just a lot, or you're biking. Like when I was in Amsterdam, I was amazed to see like
Right. Yeah.
garages of bicycles,
Yeah.
worth of places. So it sounds like that's something that's definitely more prevalent in the European market as you go through that.
Yeah, it is. It depends. It depends. And probably the UK is less so. People in the UK are less so. It tends to be more like the US probably. But certainly, yeah, on continental Europe, you're right, biking, walking is a much bigger thing. But I generally like when I go, like I would tend to do lots of walking, sightseeing, and I just like being. I like doing things that are more active. Kayaking. I would do. Whitewater rafting. So it's not as adventure stuff, but I like doing active stuff. Yes.
Excellent. And then one other thing I wanted to know is, had you actually traveled during any holiday periods that you've gotten a chance to experience local holidays of different places that you've been to?
I not a massive amount. I mean, other than kind of the Christmas period stuff. So often, like we would go away normally at Christmas, and that's sort of it's a holiday. I try and do a holiday which is not going to be something I'm vlogging and whatever about. So, but not that much. Often, partly because if I'm traveling solo, it's a terrible time to go because it's an expensive time.
Mm, that's true.
Because that tends to be more families and whatever. So not so much, no.
Okay, that's fine. So really quickly, let's talk about some of the content that you have on your site. Obviously, I've seen different types of news and
Hmm.
reviews. You have a lot of top fives or top tens of different types of things. In fact, I want to say last night you just put out something. It was like top 6 or 7 ways to get an upgrade or something like that. I saw
Yeah,
that early
yeah.
this morning. It's a really, I highly recommend that students, if you have an opportunity to do this, definitely go over to his YouTube channel, take a look at it. He's got some great tips on these things. Smaller cruise travel, saving money for cruises, which is obviously, I think a lot of people, especially in the younger age bracket, they're curious about how to do something like that. And then sometimes you'll have destination videos such as airline videos or locational videos. Anything that I missed there, or anything that maybe you even explored maybe doing more on?
No, I mean, you're right. I mean, most of the stuff I try and do is tips based, because obviously tips for traveler, it's kind of the stuff, and that's the stuff I find does well. The one thing used to do, which I would like to do more of, is stuff around trains and train travel.
Mm,
So I have done more of that. I've done like the GAN in Australia, Rovos Rail, and a few others around the world. And I would like to do more of that, because I think also, and Rocky Mountaineer, that's how I was trying to think of.
yeah,
Because I found it also, a lot of people who like cruising also like trains. It's something about those things. And a lot of them also often you can connect quite well with locations or cruising stuff. So I've done some train stuff in the past, which has been very, it's been popular. But I try and do much more tip stuff. And what's happened though since this whole pandemic-y thing is it's having to flip a little bit about what I do content-wise, because what
mm,
I've found, people actually at the moment, because like we're saying, everyone's shoving everything out, and no one knows when cruising is going to start. People don't even know when travel is going to start fully. They start traveling, and then quarantines get put in place, and countries get closed or whatever. So I'm finding actually that people want to watch a different type of content at the moment. So it's also about being nimble and reading the audience. So people want to watch much more news stuff. I don't see my channel as being a news channel, but that's what people want to watch. So it's also about having to adapt. People, so I am putting out some stuff like you were saying, the cruise cabin upgrade, because I still want to keep some regular, normal life content out there. But
sure.
it's also, I think, it's about adapting to what's working, what people are looking for. But my main focus is like tips, helping people.
Do you find that a lot of people are? I spoke with a recent YouTube influencer as well, and he was indicating a lot of the things on his channel were starting to focus on domestic travel. Is that something that you're starting to see, like people in, like maybe people in the UK are focusing more on travel within the UK, or are they really focusing more in the European
Yeah,
market?
I haven't seen it as much, but I absolutely think that's right. We're going to see that as it opens up much more. And I think what we're seeing, for example, as you know, in cruising, like in Norway, Norwegians can go cruising around Norway on 2 cruise lines now. Germany just started this weekend with their first, Royal Caribbean's Mein Schiff. It's a joint venture they have. Hapag-Lloyd is starting. AIDA Carnival Corporation starts on the 2nd,
Yes.
whatever. And so I think we will, and the UK, Hurtigrutten's launching around the UK on the 2nd of September. They don't have final approval for that yet. So I think we're going to see, not only for non-cruise travel, but for cruise travel, I think people are going to, the reality is that cruising is probably going to open up regionally, not cross-country, for a specific grouping of travelers. So I think people will start to be looking at domestic in a much bigger way. It's hard to see how cross-country travel is going to operate, in any way. It's a big challenge, of course, for the US, because the laws in the US, you can't do a lot of that stuff yet. But
Yeah.
yeah,
And a
but
lot of
yeah,
our
sorry,
surrounding countries don't even want us to travel to them at this time.
exactly. And then the passenger, people call it the Jones Act, but I think it's the Passenger Something Act, where cruisers have to call it a foreign port before they can come back. So a lot of what's happening in Europe, what's happening in Asia now, Taiwan started, they're doing, cruises around, like, Norway's doing around Norway, Taiwan's doing around their islands. But the US, as I understand, can't do that. So I guess they're going to have to find a way of doing that. But I think there's going to be that real shift to not going too far away from home, staying within the one healthcare system, if there's a problem, being able to get home easily, all that stuff, I think absolutely is going to be bigger.
You know, that's funny that you mentioned the Jones Act, because I was doing some research on that, and I think the original intent was that it was supposed to be a merchant act specifically for that.
Yeah,
But
that's what I was
I
saying.
know that when I went to, I went on a cruise a few years ago. It started in Oahu, and we were just doing all the Hawaiian Islands, and I was trying to figure out how they were going to get around doing the Jones Act. They didn't. They actually had to travel 1,500 miles south to a very small island called Fanning Island, which is a part of the Republic of Kiribati, in order to drop off supplies, and then they were able to come back up. I'm like,
Right,
1,500
exactly.
miles south is a
Yeah,
long, long,
yeah,
long
yeah, exactly.
travel.
Well, exactly. I mean, it's going to be interesting because what the German cruises, because the problem with Germany is they don't have a big coastline, so
Yeah.
they don't have ports. Like, so Ponant is fine in France. They're sailing to all these lovely out of the way ports.
Hmm.
But what the Mein Schiff does is they sailed to Kurienstadt in Norway. They docked in there for a technical call and then left, sailed back to Germany. But no passengers got off, no crew got off. So it literally was, I guess, a similar thing. And I don't know what the German rules are, but I wonder if that's the way around is something like that. But I think domestic is going to be really big. Yeah.
I would agree. Okay, so some burning questions that I know I have, and I know some of my viewers have as well.
Mm-hmm.
What is the most common question that your viewers are asking you on your YouTube channel?
The most common question they ask is really around, is this right for me?
Okay.
So so it's quite a general question, but I'm thinking of doing this. Is this right for me? That's normal. What's happened now? What's happened? If you're asking what they've been asking for the last 2 months is, should I cancel? Shouldn't I cancel? How can I get my money back? Should I only be booking next year? So it's become very, very practical and very linked to everything that's going on. So it's a much more like not agony uncle, but it's sort of like what should I be doing? What should I be doing?
Yeah.
Should I, and that's. But normally it's around, can you help me make the right decision?
And now it's more of an advisory role about, like, what should I
Exactly.
do? Because I think I'm
What should I
stuck in
do
this type of
now? Yeah,
situation.
yeah. Should I pay my final balance is due for a cruise I've got in October? Should I pay it? Things like that.
Excellent. Now, what is a question that you wish that your viewers would ask?
The question I wish they would ask me is, would you make a video about this? Because I really want. That's the question, because it's knowing what they want. That's what I really would ask. They would ask is the things that I don't know that they really want to know. To get stuff that will give you much more insight. So they tend to ask questions which are linked to what I'm doing. I wish they'd ask me questions about what I'm not doing. It's sort of like, it would help me much more as a creator to solve that thing. So I know when people do send me questions, like come back to the solo travel thing, someone sent me a question, like 2 people sent me a question the same week, which was around how can I find a better deal for solo cruising? Like, well, that's a fantastic question. And do you have a video that helps me, find a better way, a cheap way to solo cruise? It's like, well, no, I don't, but I will have one within a week to answer the question. That's the sort of, because then, and that video did fantastically well because that was what people were looking for. So
You
that's
just don't know until you try it, I guess, and that's kind of what it is.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
as people like start to bring up those questions, it does, for influencers out there, it kind of does spark that interest. It's like, maybe I should do a little bit of research. Maybe I should find some experts on that. Maybe I should do some secondary and maybe even some primary research in order to be able to initiate that process. So I think
yeah.
that the audience, our students, our listeners, and our viewers, I think they provide us with just as much content as we try to provide as experts.
Absolutely.
So
I think you're right. As someone listening to or watching somebody whose opinion you like, is ask them to do content for you is the best thing you can do. Like, this is what I really want to know. Can you do something about it? Can you answer it for me? That would be the best thing as a viewer that you could do to help someone that you like watching.
excellent. Now, over here in the States, we have global entry, we have mobile passport. Do you have anything like that at all in terms of in the European market?
No, not really. There is for, I think there is for non-EU UK passport holders. I think there is process, but really what's happened in Europe much more, and it's also places, I guess now like Australia, is the machines where you basically it reads your passport. So that's been the real changes because you can get through really really quickly without queuing. I know even now when I fly into the US, when I used to travel a lot for work into the US, I was coming there once or twice a month. I was looking at the time of should I sign up for global entry because otherwise you snake slowly for an hour and a half down the thing. But now they have the machines in the US places. It's pretty quick coming out. So no, that's been the main thing that I use.
And I know they used to do like you'd have to fill out these slips as early as like a year ago, 2 years ago. Now it's like you can
No paperwork.
yeah, there's really no paperwork at all involved in this
Yeah,
process. So
yeah,
just ask you a quick question and boom, you're on your way.
yeah, yeah.
So another question I know some of my viewers ask me occasionally is in terms of currency, do you tend to buy that domestically before you go on trips, or are you going to buy that when you arrive in the country that you're going to?
I would normally take it. I'd normally take it with me
Okay.
because you can normally get a better rate. I tend not to travel with a lot of currency. I tend to mostly travel with US dollars
Okay.
or euros. Um, so it's only, and I would normally check out before I go to places. Can I get away with US dollars, or even in some places euros? You can get away with. Like I was in Vietnam and stuff, they would take euros as well. But
Okay.
I would normally obviously if you go to places like Japan and stuff, you can't use US dollars, but I would always start with the defaults. Can I just is there a way to use US dollars or is it an easy way to convert US dollars into local currency? I used to draw money out of the cash point if I needed local currency. But normally I would take it with me. So, because I get a best deal, but if I often, if it's going somewhere that I'm not going to be, I don't think I'm going to spend a lot of money. Like when I was in Cambodia this year, I thought I'm not going to spend, I have no idea how much money I'm going to spend in Cambodia. So I literally got by with US dollars and took a little bit out of the cash point, even though it wasn't a terribly good rate. So I didn't get $100 worth of Cambodian, I don't know what the currency was now.
Whatever that is
So,
over there, that's like
and
very
suddenly realized
inexpensive.
I'm now kicking around with, trying to buy something. So I try to minimize the amount of currency I take.
Okay, fantastic. Well, this has been an amazing opportunity to speak with you. As I said, I have been a fan of yours for a long time. I hope a lot of my students go to your YouTube site as well, which is Cruise Tips for
Brilliant.
Travelers, again with 2 L's. Uh, it's phenomenal. You are a fountain of amazing information for us in terms of our travel. So again, Gary, I want to say thank you so much for taking your time in order to be able to provide us with that information. It's really appreciated, sir.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Enjoyed it. It's good.
Thank you. Now, for my viewers that are out there and for the students that are listening, if you have any questions or comments, you can always send them to scott@theprofessortravel.com. If you like this video, you can certainly give us a thumbs up. We really appreciate it. If you want to know when new videos are being posted, you can click the bell icon above us here. And of course, if you haven't already subscribed, please do. Now, if you're listening to this on the podcast, again, please feel free to rate us. Please feel free to subscribe. We really do appreciate it. But until our next journey, make every day a travel adventure. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye now.